All right, Worksties, before we get into it, hold our drink while we shout out our sponsor, socialjobs.com. Shout out to socialjobs.com for backing the chaos. We mean brilliance of the Worksties. Now let's get into it. All right, Danielle, episode 13.
Lucky number 13.
It is lucky number 13. Also, if you put them together, numerology, it's 4, which is my life path. So it is a lucky number. It's a lucky number. All right.
Good to know.
We're going to talk about worker confidence is at an all-time low on this episode. We'll talk a little bit about having to, I don't know what we want to call it, but make the justification for your job and tell people what you do and show people what you do when they may or may not understand it. And then we'll talk about side gigs and some of the stats around that as we dive in. So let's get started. Workforce confidence, all-time low. I have a stat here that says in February to March 2025, it dropped 24 index points in February, down from 33 in January, and is far from pandemic recovery high of 41 in early 2022. Financial outlook confidence dipped to 15, lower than the early pandemic crash of April 2020. In career progression, confidence declined to 24 in July 2024, on par with 2020 lockdown levels. So when we look at what's happening kind of in our economy and what's shaping out in some of the workforce confidence, we have been seeing a lot of layoffs and things of that nature, not necessarily due to, I think, economic conditions, but they're all in the name of efficiency when we look at them. I did see that Amazon had published something pretty recently that was saying they were going to lay off more workers due to efficiency. I mean, we've seen Meta do it. You can just keep going, BP, in the name of efficiency. I think we'll continue to see this. And I think people are getting really nervous, even with, Doge initiatives. That's also some of its automation and efficiencies, things like that. I was talking to Rashard as we were on our walk last night. I think it was. Yeah, it was last night. And I said, we do live in a pretty cool time, though. When you think about growing up in the technology that we had, like I remember the big computer on the table. And then I went to the flip phone, or the huge phones, right? No one can afford it. Then we went to the flip phone. And then now we operate as a tablet on our phone. Technology and automation is becoming more and more. We've been talking about like the Jetsons. And I always wanted that mask that Jane had when she answered the phone. She looked like she was done up. I was like, now that's cool. That's some technology I can get with. Like, you don't have to get ready.
Which, I mean, we kind of have with filters and things like that.
That's so true. The filter thing is just like a Jetson technology. Some people put them, but then sometimes you don't recognize them. It has to kind of look like your face at the same time. I don't know.
Right.
It's got to be recognizable. Yeah. What do you think about the workforce confidence being at an all-time low? I mean, I know you're seeing things on LinkedIn too out there, people talking about it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of surprised that it's the lowest it's ever been. I mean, I'm sure at some point is when they started tracking it, because I would hazard that during the Great Depression, that was probably the lowest, but this is, in modern times. But even that seems like, was it this bad in 2009 when everything crashed? I don't, but I think people probably, maybe that had more to do with discouragement over the housing market and things like that. I don't know. But it's a little bit surprising that it's the lowest. But also you figure 2009, that's 16 years ago, a lot of people who were, not in the workforce at that time. You're 10 years old at that time and now you're 26. Your opinion is going to be different than somebody at that time might have been, because their life experience would have been different. So, it's all subjective, but I think it makes sense. I think that there's probably general discouragement just because of some of the automation we're seeing and how it's impacting lives. And you think too, I think social media probably doesn't help.
Yeah.
I've seen a lot of people who are discouraged on LinkedIn because they see so many people talking about getting jobs and things like that. And while you want to be happy for them and optimistic that it will come your way too, it can be incredibly discouraging. And then I think, especially when people start talking, there's people trying to be, cute and try to be funny by posting things that are not really funny and not really cute, but they think it is, about the situation. And that can hit you in a certain way if you're not currently employed. That might not have bothered you, or you may not have even really paid attention to previously. So I think it is just a really interesting time. And I think that there are things to be positive about and excited about when it comes to technology and things, because you're right. My first experience with a computer was in a classroom when, we would share it with the class and do programs. And then I started learning computer programming as part of a special magnet program when I was in middle school, which is a whole other conversation. But it's interesting how it was kind of introduced to us. And then, like you mentioned the Jetsons, I know we've talked a lot about that. I call my Roomba Rosie because I always wanted to have a robot who could clean. But it's true because I think it was Dick Tracy, the old Dick Tracy comic that had a phone or some sort of communication device on his wrist, like sort of like a smartwatch, or an Apple Watch probably specifically is probably maybe the closest thing to that. And those comics happened, well before we were born. So I think in some way kind of interesting because we're seeing things that were only an idea or only, what if kind of things happen in our lifetimes.
Yeah.
And so that's sort of interesting. But I'm sure that was the same with other generations too, just in a different way. Transatlantic flights and, things like that were not commonplace, during the 50s and, wasn't really until the 60s, I think. But anyway, yeah, so I think that's true. I sort of feel like there's not less enthusiasm about it, but just sort of more hesitancy around what we're seeing. Whereas I sort of think that like earlier generations and when we were, in school, that there would have been more excitement about some of these things. Whereas now that it's happening and it's happening faster, maybe that's the issue, is that people are having a hard time sort of digesting what's happening because it is happening. So, you know what I mean?
Yeah. I agree with that.
I think that can kind of play into it.
Yeah. I think there's a fear. Like when you talk about that, like there's this fear. I think we all like the technology and the cool things that we have, right? It continues to evolve, but then there's this fear. And when you look at what's happening with AI, there's a lot of companies who are using, in the name of optimization and efficiency in technology, these jobs going away. When the fact of the matter is, if you're thinking about like recruiting automation, it should free up more time to the seat, because we have put in these systems and technology and talent acquisition that take up more task time. It used to be you just pick up the phone. Hey, how's it going? Have a job for you. You have a conversation. You say, send me over your information. You might have to do something from a background perspective.
Or come into the office and,
yes. And off you go, right?
Remember those days?
They're at work, and now we want to track them. We want to understand it. They have to apply through an automated process. You have to make sure your system data is kept up. So there's nurturing that happens through the system of automation versus, maybe picking up the phone and calling someone. So to me, in that world, it's really bringing time back to the desk where we've made it hard to work with in recruiting. But then when I look at some of the other companies out there that are kind of doing in the name of automation, we went to Sam's Club yesterday, and I haven't been for a while. We need some things like paper towels or whatever. And when we walked out or went to walk out, there was I don't know, the things that you walk under that scan your cart and they just check you automatically, like they have at Amazon and things like that. So I said to myself, or I said to Richard, I was like, oh, that's going to be, all of a sudden we're going to see the next headline that says, 1,600 Walmart, Sam's Club workers because of automation. But there was...
So they have that at Sam's Club actually checked you out? Or was it just that they were putting in?
It's not ready yet, I don't think. But they could see what was in the cart based on when we walked by. Like he checked his app on the way out.
Right.
And said, you guys are good, and didn't have to look at, our app or anything like that. So it was really interesting. I'm wondering how it's going to all eventually unfold, because if you can just go and, it scans you out or whatever else, or it checks your cart to say, they entered all the things that they had scanned throughout their store, because we do the barcode, because I hate waiting in that line with someone else to check me out.
So I'm not,
Yeah.
I'm a Costco person, so I've never shopped at Sam's Club.
Yeah, I don't want to re-empty
So
my
I don't,
cart.
yeah.
So do you have to, like, when you go to Costco, we go around, we shop, we do the scan and go, we scan every single item. And then once we get to the front, we check out on our app. And then what would happen is we would just go through and then someone would check to make sure, and they would scan different items just to make sure that we didn't miss anything within the cart. And then off you go. Well, this
Okay.
time when we went through, we did our little scan and go thing. And then we got to the end. We went through the, whatever it is. I don't know. Whatever it's called, Danielle. We go through that.
Like the arch of shame
Yeah.
that if it goes off, you're going to be busted.
Luckily, we scanned everything. No, we always do.
It's a truth. It's like the cone of truth, like, is this? Yeah.
It really is the cone of truth. We walked through. The guy was like, "You're good." Off we go. So, I think some things to make it more convenient for people, they're always good. But I think that also creates some of that fear to say, okay, we're automating so much. Where does it stop, start, even begin sometimes? But we're in this time in this world where, I don't know, it's just so hard to say, let's limit it, because it's just going to continue to evolve. It's just going to continue to go, and jobs are going to continue to shape and reshape and change. And ideally, you bring it to where that time you have with people, the time you have with people is quality in a job. If you're in a, type of role where you're doing something at, let's say, Walmart or Sam's, or even like you're doing a recruiting role at a company or whatever else, where that time becomes so valuable and important because it's great time spent to assist somebody or to work with somebody or to acknowledge them or whatever that looks like. So I just think, based on the automation that we're seeing, that's where the workplace or workforce confidence is.
We're going to have to be, I was just going to say, I think there always has to be a certain amount of people involved in the process, because like in the example you discussed with Sam stuff, I would totally do. I would totally do that, because if I can do a self-checkout, I went into the grocery store the other night just to buy like 2 things, did self-checkout because even though there wasn't a lot of lines, it was just faster for me and I don't have to make small talk with somebody, But at the same time, there's going to be people who maybe are older or who have physical disabilities, who maybe can't do the self-checkout or whatever. And I've even heard of grocery stores keeping like a line open with a cashier who is willing to kind of go slowly and have a conversation with the person that they're scanning out, because especially with older people, it might be some of the only interaction that they get. So I think that, there's always going to be people like that who, are going to need more time because it's going to take them a little bit longer, and who are willing to wait in line and things like that. But I think if you can replace the efficiency of a self-checkout type of environment with maybe more people on the floor who are willing to assist, in finding things. Because I think one of the things that, especially from my customer perspective, what gets really frustrating is when the whole thing is automated and there's nobody to ask a question to or tell you if there's, do you even carry this? I cannot find it anywhere. That sort of thing.
Yeah.
And then you get to the cash register and you still don't have a person to talk to. So I feel like that's like, if we can devote more time to people, making sure this shelves are stocked and they're available to answer questions or help you find something, then I think then that part of the experience is collectively a little bit more, is a little bit friendlier overall. And so I think that applies recruiting too. Like, have the automation in place where it makes sense, but don't completely automate the entire process, because nobody wants to feel like a product.
Right.
And I think that's the thing that automation can do in recruiting, is that it will tend to automate it so much that you end up feel like a commodity and not an actual person looking for work.
Yeah. I think you have to meet people where they are at the same time. So if I think about, just the Sam's Club example, right? And I think about the apps that every company wants you to download an app, whether it be rewards or jobs or I had to get a new phone because I ran out of space because of apps, and I still didn't download a bunch of apps, but I don't want singular apps on my phone. It's just, I have certain ones that I use a lot, so I'll download those. But, every time you're maybe looking for a job, less it's an aggregate of all the jobs. I don't see where a candidate, unless they're getting paid through it, and once they're working, they will download an app all day. But you also have to meet customers where they are. So whether it be a candidate seat or whether it be, a hiring manager seat, let's just say, when you think about that, you're going through the checkout, right? But there's sometimes where I don't want to unload my card and have to put it back in and do all the stuff. And I have more every time I'm going to someone who's going to check me out. I'm going every time. So I think as you think about, this technology piece of it, it's meeting people where they are in their, I don't want to call it a journey, but okay, I'm a candidate and I'm applying. I want to look and I want to apply for this job. How do I get there? Can I talk to a person? Maybe I'm a person who wants to talk to someone. Do I have to go through the system? And then once I do go through the system, can I self-schedule that time on someone's calendar? If I'm qualified, does the system know I'm qualified? And then I'm talking to a real person. So I think it's really important to understand that. And then going back to the workforce confidence piece of it, it's a tough one because it's also a double-edged sword when you think about automation, what's happening with the narrative out there, how we need to evolve and change. Companies, are trying to make sure that they keep everything intact from a profit standpoint. So there's this dynamic that's happening in the marketplace today that I don't believe we've seen before. I'm trying to think of a time that maybe we could relate it to your point, like even 2008, 2009. No, I don't feel like it was like this, in the confidence low. It was more about, is there going to be enough jobs in the economy from what was happening from a financial perspective? When I think about the bubble burst with housing and things of that nature, where this is more, we're seeing the impacts of employment because of, in the name of right, wrong, and different, in the name of optimization.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And I mean, even thinking just like 2009, I mean, that's when most people really kind of started using Facebook. Instagram didn't exist. LinkedIn was certainly around, but it wasn't being used the way it is today. There weren't things like Uber. There weren't things like Lyft or a lot of the, Airbnb, like a lot of the things that have kind of become part of the gig economy. I don't even think we said that at the time. I remember CareerBuilder had a subsidiary. I think it was called Solo Gig. Do you remember that?
Yeah, I remember.
And
Solo
it was just
Gig.
a very,
Yep.
Yeah, it was kind of I was trying to remember the other day what that was called, and it just kind of came to me. And it was a site specifically for people who were looking for like part-time work or for a short-term assignment. And I remember at the time they were kind of saying like, oh, this is probably where the future is going in terms of work. And I couldn't really see it at the time, but now looking back that does make a lot of sense, because I think the way our economy has shifted so much that it almost, and maybe that's part of it too, is that people don't feel like there's anything permanent. You know what I mean? Like there's so much going on in the world. There's so much volatility within everything that maybe a lot of people are just sort of like, what can you even depend on anymore?
Yeah.
What does that look like?
I agree.
Because I know, like, Kevin and I have talked about, like, sort of when we were going through school and sort of the direction that we were encouraged to go in was more of a professional, the kind where you go to a 4-year university and take out a student loan and you have a lot of debt and all these things, and they were supposed to guarantee you a job. Really we've come to find out that was maybe not the right choice. And he, has even said, like, if I'd only known, I would have maybe gone to a trade school or something, because then he could have followed and done what he really enjoyed, as opposed to what he thought was the right course. And I think some of that has shifted too, is that people are trying to find more of what they enjoy doing and how do they move about that in a certain way. And I think that's where it comes into, like, having the side gig, and can you make enough money to support yourself or your family on that? Is that realistic? And I think that's maybe a bit of what we're seeing too, is that people are like, want to have the security of a full-time job, whatever that looks like for them, but then also want to do some side work so that they have something to fall back on. But maybe also if they could do it in a way that is something they really enjoy, you know what I mean? So I think it's really complicated, I guess, is what I'm saying.
Yeah,
you know?
I agree with that. There was a stat in there talking about the side gigs. It said 32% already have a side hustle, 55% plan to start one in 2025, well, another 55%. And it was way back in November of 2022. I think it's November 4th, if I'm remembering the article date right. Could have been 7th. I want to say it's 4th. But it was in the Wall Street Journal. And the title was, and I did this article with the Wall Street Journal, the interviewer, and it was more workers get side hustles to keep up with rising costs. So November 4th, 2022 was the article date. And there was a quote in there that I had, and it was, the impact of inflation is forcing many professionals to pick up extra work they never would have considered before. So I think to your point, one, the finding, what do you enjoy? What are you doing? Maybe someone went down this path to your point. It was like, I don't really want to do this. I've done that in my career. I went to school to be a medical assistant, paid all that money. Shout out to all the medical assistants out there. I went to do my internship in a doctor's office, and I was like, I don't want to do this. Like, this is not something I wanted to do. So anyways, wasted all that, I think it was 9 months of school or whatever else, and then decided this isn't for me. I did consider just being a phlebotomist and just drawing blood all day. I was really good at drawing blood. So that was definitely a consideration for me. I was like, I don't even really want to be in this field.
And even that has turned into kind of a weird, because now a lot of phlebotomists don't actually have a home in terms of like working out of a hospital or something. They float around. I mean, I'm sure you know that, but like, at one time you would have thought, oh, I'll become a phlebotomist and I'll be able to get a job at a hospital and I'll just be there all the time. And in reality, that's not always the case either. Even medical, for as huge of an industry as that is, has kind of in some ways a little bit more of that niche or side gig type of work.
Yeah. I was just thinking about, the cost of living, inflation. We're not at the same pace, right? It just keeps outpacing wages and everything else. So I think we'll continue to see people with different side hustles and trying them out. Yeah, I know a lot of people who became travel agents for a little bit, did the travel agency thing. I've done myself, Uber, delivery driving, and DoorDash, those types of things. So I think we'll see.
Yeah, done that in Instacart, Shopper.
Yeah. And then right now, like with the Amazon packages too, like they're running cargo vans or sometimes U-Hauls. I don't know if you have this by you, but we have so many deliveries that they have independent contractors that are delivering the Amazon packages now. And like, I'll see them pull up in the U-Haul rent for the day, $19.95. Yeah.
There'll be, there's a lot of them that we get, especially during the holidays, especially because they built a distribution center not too far from us. And so usually we'll get like the Amazon truck, but then there's often like other people who come around like in their car, and are dropping stuff off too.
Yeah.
But to your point I was going to say really quickly about inflation, it's interesting because I don't remember ever noticing prices changing so much before. And I've noticed it, especially the last few weeks, because use the Target app a lot to place orders to go prep. And I've seen like things that we buy all the time and are constantly replacing, the price just go up. I mean, sometimes it's only like 20 cents, but it's like, now I can see it. Like, whereas if I went in the store, I might not notice, but we do buy a lot of the same things all the time. That it's like, oh, well, that used to be $3.99. Now it's $4.99, and so then especially when you see it bump up by $1, it's like, oh, that's a big jump. Why did it suddenly go up so much? And, I know that, the cost of oil definitely impacts how much we pay even for food.
Yeah.
Because the cost to ship something across the United States or in the packaging, all of that has tied to oil. So when the cost of oil is higher, everything gets more expensive, but then it never comes back down. You know what I mean? So like we end up like with the price of oil going down, I'm not really sure I'm going to see those prices roll back at Target, I mean, it would be nice, but I'd be real surprised.
Walmart
But,
definitely rolls
like,
back the prices. Remember they had the rollback
oh, I
guy?
know, but then you have Walmart, and I don't like going to the uh it's just a whole other thing. Kevin and I've had some negative experiences at Walmart by the people who are employed there. That it's
Hey,
like,
I worked
I
there
don't
for
want
2
to.
years after high school or during high school.
Yeah, well, that was a long time. More recently, when we've gone there, and it's like, are you kidding me? What is happening? So yeah. So anyway, the cost of all those things is impacts, and then it's interesting because I feel like it's a never ending cycle. I mean,
It
everything's
is.
gonna get more expensive.
Yeah.
Sure, but at the same time, it's really hard if you are, employed. And there's been many times where I've been employed at the same rate of pay for years, and that has not changed. And so when things are getting incrementally more expensive, you start looking for ways to cut back your spend. And so you end up not doing a lot of things, maybe not being able to go on vacation or not being able to eat out or go to the movies or whatever. And those are small things in your life that have a big impact on your state of mind and how your sense of happiness, what your sense of happiness is. So if you can no longer afford to do those small things because you're paying more for groceries, then it probably, it will impact your state of mind as far as how your job is, because you might get more resentful. You might start to feel like, I keep doing more, but I'm not getting paid anymore and everything's expensive and can't even afford to take my family out or whatever. So I think it's all so connected. That's all I'm trying to say.
Yeah, it is. It's really connected. And when I think about, we have Walmart right up the street, so Target's too far. We have a great little Walmart.
Target's closer to me.
Plus, I'm on a Walmart budget right now. So, anyways, definitely
I
on
don't
that
go
budget.
there, but it definitely presents more of a challenge, I would say.
Yeah, trying to prepare. But it said 56% of people would not be prepared for a recession if it happens now. I think it's more than that. I think that's a low ball. I don't know exactly.
I would say
the population.
Yeah,
but
it's probably closer to like 80 or 90%.
That's what I would think too.
I don't think any really. I mean, unless you are Warren Buffett or Jeff Bezos or Elon Musk, anybody who's really like I'm not saying anything negative. I'm just saying that unless you are very, very wealthy, I can't imagine how a recession doesn't impact you in some way. There's always going to be, because even celebrities and things, they make a lot of money, but they also spend a lot of money to have, and publicity and people who's helped them. They're kind of their own business. You know what I mean? Like they are the product.
Yeah.
So, it's interesting because, that's when you find out somebody who's a celebrity who hasn't made a movie in like 10 years and they're broke. What? How are you broke? It's like, well, they probably take care of a lot of people. They probably take care of their family, and they probably have a lot of people that they pay. And so they're kind of their own, small business owner in a certain sense. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So
we also became this name brand culture, I feel like, where people spend way beyond their means, or they want this, I don't know, whatever bag or whatever shoes, Gucci bag, Gucci shirt, Gucci shoes, Gucci belt or Louis Vuitton, which is so expensive when you think about it for the average person to actually afford.
Well,
so I think there's this
buying like
standard,
a belt or a bag,
right? Yeah. I believe like there's this, I don't know, keeping up with the Joneses, I guess is what you can call it. That happens.
Yeah, I would say that. And I noticed it, especially when I lived in Southern California. It was very true.
Yeah.
Because there's such a car culture. So it was all about your car. You might live in a dump and have no furniture, but as long as your car and your person looked good. So then it was more about, the car and the clothes and the this and the that. And, sometimes it doesn't affect certain people just because of what they do and who they're social with. But if you work in a company where that's kind of the vibe, and I know you and I worked on site with a company where that was definitely the vibe, it was all about, what you look like and what you wore and what you drove and all of that, which I think is one of the great things about working from home is that you're not subjected to that same level of scrutiny that you might be if you work in an office, whereas people are seeing your car, people are seeing what you're wearing or not able to afford or whatever. So, in a lot of ways, especially if you can't pay your people a lot of money to keep up with the quote unquote Joneses, having the ability to work from home and not have to deal with that, or having to bring your lunch and everybody else is eating out, all those things are really, they kind of play mind games with you in a way that a lot of people probably don't even understand. But if you're a teacher and you're working in a school, you probably don't experience that as much once you're dealing with the parents or something like that. But even kids now have electronic devices or wearing, fancy clothes or whatever, unless they're in a uniform. But
yeah, I agree.
I could just keep going on that.
I think we'll continue to see the workforce confidence low just based on the continuing narrative that's happening. I mean, I don't see a big shift. There is some good news. And I feel like with the silver lining and all of it is when we see, Apple investing the $5 billion in the market over a certain amount of time. And we see the GE Aviation that's going to invest $1 billion, I think, this year in 2025 in manufacturing. So, right. So that's amazing. Like those things that I forget how many states it was. I think was it 26, Danielle? It was like 26 states or 16. I'm inflating the number.
I think it was 16.
I remember the 6, 26, 16. I don't know. It's one of the two.
It was a lot of states.
It was a lot of states. It was upwards of 10. We'll just say that at this point.
Right.
Upwards of 15. We know for sure upwards of 15.
Probably, because it might have been like a quarter of the United States.
Yeah.
Like 16 to 8, it was at least like a quarter of the states.
Yeah.
So, and in obviously specific cities and counties and things, but still, that has a big impact on a lot of economies in, a lot of states.
Yeah, I agree. So I think there is some silver lining there that we're seeing come back into the market. It's going to be all how it's positioned, the narrative behind it, the views. Do people really understand what's happening? Which is why we do the Worksties Tea report, the job market tea that we have to help keep people informed on these things of what's actually happening out there, the good, the bad, the ugly overall. I think it'll become more important. And I think we'll still continue to see the side gigs or side hustles that will grow because we don't seem to be leveling out anytime soon on our economy, just overall in the cost of living. So I think you'll see more and more of that or starting a little business or whatever that might look like for people, which I think is kind of cool if you're able to kind of give your time somewhere else too. And it's something you enjoy, something you love. Why not? Why wouldn't you?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, you've done it with Osrain, and like I did it with reselling vintage goods, and that market became really tumultuous, because of the market. But the value of things that I've collected over the years that like I kind of looked at and thought that I could probably get this much for, sort of true, but there's a lot of fluctuation and things like that are collectibles it really comes down to what somebody's willing to pay for something.
Yeah.
Whereas if it's a more, like a new product or product that you created, that's a different sort of thing because you have to not only the cost of goods, but your sort of intellectual property of what you created, all of that kind of plays into the cost of that. But I think it's true that, we can, for me, I knew when I started doing the vintage reselling, there was a financial aspect to it where, my husband had been sick for a long time, wasn't working, and we needed to make some extra money. And it just was sort of a timing thing where we had some of the product, we'd recently started collecting some different things, and it just kind of worked out. But in the long run, it was a lot of work too. And so I got to a point where I just couldn't really sustain it with the job demands that I had. And so, there's that. So it's hard to have a side gig, especially if it's something where you're sort of the face and the person who's doing all the work, this well. It's not like, doing Uber or something where you can just be like, well, I'm going to work a shift tonight and see what happens. When you're selling something that you've created or that you're putting out there, you are the face, the voice, the everything behind this business. And unless you have, a teenager or young adult or somebody who's willing to kind of help you in your home. And I don't mean that like, you're putting your kids to work, but like anybody who can kind of help you, maybe. I mean, and I did a lot of resell, my husband would do a lot of like the post office runs and things like that for me. But like I did everything else. Like or he would help source products and stuff. So it is a lot. It's very draining. And if you have small children or if you have an ailing parent that you're caring for, whatever, it's a mental toll too.
Yeah.
So
it is hard. Like when I think
I don't
about
know
that, Danielle, and I think about everything comes down to you. Like I get into these places where I feel like I'm just so overwhelmed with everything. And it's not to say that like Richard won't help me fill packets or, Caleb won't label. They help me. But at the same time, when you think about the marketing, the creative, you're the voice, I'm pushing everything out to social media. I have to make the product, package the product, again, where I get some help along the way, ship the product. It gets to be a lot. And I have my days where I'm like, I'm so overwhelmed with it. So what do these side gigs end up looking like? Will be interesting too. Is it more kind of the Ubers and even on the Amazon package delivery? I think when you go to sign up for that, like there's a area radius thing that you can say, yes, I would like to do this. And then they tell you if there's something available as a contractor in there, but then you have to say what hours you would want to deliver. And I just tend to think if you're not available to deliver for the majority of the hours, that's where the first line of people who are selected.
You probably can get away with evening deliveries if it's during the holidays and stuff. But if you have a full-time job and you're expected to work during the day, how are you going to be you can't make yourself available during those hours. So that's where it gets kind of tricky is like, how do I balance the two, Because I remember during the holidays, we had packages showing up at 10 o'clock at night and stuff sometimes, and it wasn't even like gifts or anything. It was just like stuff that we'd order, but it would be out for delivery for like 10 hours. And that wouldn't normally be the case. And so I want to make sure that our porch light's on because I want to make sure somebody's going to be able to drop it off, or it would go to the next day because, I guess the person ran out of steam or whatever the case may be. And I had to go to the next day. So it's, and I'm sure those were people who had other jobs or other commitments that these were the only hours they could work.
I would think so. That they're doing other things. The other thing that we talked a little bit about, there was 55% said that they are working harder to prove their worth, is what I'll call it, at work, and to prove what they do. And I feel like we've been in this situation throughout our careers, either on my team or separately or whatever the case may be, so for someone to really understand what we were doing, especially when you think about, the job board negotiation, contracts, the technology side of it, the analytics, when you think about, making sure that you understand the job market and pushing that out to the business. And so they really can have a good conversation with the clients. Like I think about the 9 different bosses in 3 years at Elmer because they couldn't figure out based on what I did. It was, recruiting excellence and what my team did. You were included in that team. So it was constantly moved around. So I think, with 55% of people saying, hey, this is what I do every day and this is why I do it, there's a gap in knowledge there. And I think about, the last place that we were at and when I left, my worry always is, well, will someone understand what you do? Because the role you play is so important in how you would support in those things is so important. But there were so many people who don't get that aspect of the business. And I feel like if I'm hearing that 55% stat, that means only 45% of people feel good that someone knows what they're doing. 55% are working harder to kind of say, this is what I do all the time. There's this gap in business. I don't know how it's created. I think it's lack of knowledge or understanding or something to that nature about how everything actually works. I know a lot of people think there's this magic box that goes out for a job. All of a sudden it brings in people and the recruiters have it. No. There's a whole heck of a lot more that goes into that. That is not just how it works, right? There's integration. There's what sources are you using? How are you paying for them? So I don't know. Danielle, what does that bring up for you when you think about that 55% that are
it brings up
proving themselves?
I mean, I think that's true. And it's, it's gotten more complicated the longer I've been in this, in these types of roles because, with automation comes more problems, if you will. Like it's just, there's, it used to be like, if you had an open job way back in the day, if you had an open job, you might post a wanted ad in the local paper and people might come in for office hours to apply or whatever. And it's so far removed from that now that it's almost laughable, because in a certain way, like we've figured out all these ways to automate it, that we've made it so complicated. And there's really no reason for it to be as complicated as it is. But I don't know if we can go back necessarily. But I think there's ways to make it better. And a lot of the automation comes from, social media being adopted, other people going to other places to look for work that they didn't have before. All of that plays into it, but then it also has made job descriptions much more complicated. It's made finding a job more complicated, because trying to figure out how to approach a job from the perspective of your resume. It used to be that, a recruiter could get a resume, look at it and go, oh, okay, well, they didn't have this, but I bet you they did do that. Maybe it's just not on the resume or whatever. And so then you would have a conversation, you'd figure that out. Whereas now you're kind of leaning on technology so much to tell you that, or inherently know that, this particular role obviously is going to do that because that's how this role is done.
Yeah.
So, and I do really think, and I said this on another episode, that we've gotten away from humanizing the recruiter and trying to automate what they do so much that, we're not training recruiters today on how to recruit. So like if you lost your internet access and all you had was a phone and you had a stack of resumes, what would you do? Or you had your LinkedIn contacts, what would you do? So, I think there's people who would be petrified to be in that situation, because all they know is how to post a job. The system sends it out and you get back resumes, and, they're not getting enough. Because I do remember my last company too, like every once in a while, I'd have someone who would reach out to me and say, so-and-so's not getting enough jobs or not getting enough candidates for this job. And I look at it and I, run some numbers and say, well, they just posted the job yesterday. You've got to give it a little time. Or look at the job description. It's terrible. It's not going to get any lift online.
That's not SEO optimized.
Right. Or, or you'd have like, oh, well, they got 100 applications in this last week. What is the disconnect? Are they not getting the right candidates? Are they not even looking at the candidates they got? And so there's a disconnect too, because sometimes leaders are like, oh, my recruiter doesn't get any candidates. Well, are they getting candidates because it's just not the right ones? Or are they just saying they're not getting any because none is a perfect match? Or they don't really know what to do with them, so they're just telling their manager because they kind of got called out on why they're not filling the jobs. There's a million reasons, and I don't know that we've also given leadership the right instructions and the ability to seek out that information and figure out themselves what's going on.
Yeah, when you say that, I think about two things come to mind. One is, I think at some point, I don't know where this occurred or how or whatever else, but there's been a devaluation, is what I'll call it, of recruiting and the recruiting function, right? Because there is a belief you can automate a lot of that process, which you can. Like I said, I can see where you can automate 80% of a recruiter's desk, but that 20% then becomes that full-time work because they're spending more time with candidates, they're having good conversations, they're spending time with their hiring managers, they're out at, maybe events or different things based on if it's a local recruiting versus, if you're also recruiting a candidate population that needs to be handheld a little bit more, now you're able to spend time with them, or they're harder to find, harder to source, harder to convert, you're able to spend time with them. So I think with automation that is really good, and when you think about agentic AI being able to do the task-based things, learning and being smart on a desk and nurturing talent, sending out notifications, really understanding that piece of it, where it went a little bit, or it's going, I don't know if it's going wrong, but probably really say it is, it's too sometimes devalued. Because to your point, if someone needed to find a candidate, right, all of a sudden the magic box people don't know what to do. As a leader, And then you have a recruiter who, I won't say we're a dying breed. Definitely not. But sitting in this recruiter seat, the people that have had to really, Boolean search strings and logic and setting up the Google alert. So when someone comes on the web with that skill set, you automatically know they're there and you're reaching out to them as a recruiter and you're nurturing and building your network as a recruiter. I think that skill has gotten lost along the way in what it really means to be a recruiter. And that's where you have like this automation piece coming in, which automation should be there because, like I said, we've made technology so complex that the recruiters need AI to be able to complete these function and tasks, not even have to deal with it. But now you're spending time with your candidate. And now you're spending time with your hiring managers. And now you're spending time on your strategy and how you're going to find these people and making sure you're meeting your metrics and all of that. So it's a lost art. Some still have it. And I think, well, dinosaurs are still living. I'm going to call us dinosaurs. Someone should tap into that knowledge and get it and really understand it, because once things aren't working the way that they need to be working, or if you don't have any money, you're a small business and you want to start something up, you're not going to be able to start with, a technology that costs X thousands of dollars to be able to recruit. I mean, you're working with someone who has a startup business, and yes, there's some technology there, but a lot of it is that old school networking, sourcing, spending time with people, trying to get them to convert in this skill set, right? That's where like the rubber meets the road to me. And when I think about,
and I think part of the problem is that companies are doing the automation, but they're not giving that time back to people and telling them how to use it.
Yeah.
Because if you have training them how to use it, because if you say, oh, well, this is going to give you a lot more time back, they should be saying, okay, now that we've automated, this is what we want you to be spending more time on the phone, calling, candidates, talking to them, prepping them for interviews, calling them after the interview's over and saying, how did it go? Getting some feedback from them, then going to the hiring manager and saying, what did you think? Blah, blah, blah. There's a lot of talking that has to happen in these types of roles that I think was very difficult to have for a long time because there was so much on that desk. But I think the automation is being positioned to companies as a replacement of people, which is, I think maybe companies are doing that in order to be able to sell it successfully. Like, oh, you have to give up your people in order to have the automation. The automation's more efficient, blah, blah, blah. And in reality, that's not what it should be. It should be the automation and the people work together.
Yes.
And then, it shouldn't be one or the other. But I think companies have been doing that. And I know that because of what I've done over the years, like how I've talked to companies, and I've always pushed back on that of like, oh, well, yeah, but it's not, what if that doesn't work? But if you talk to people who are at an Indeed or LinkedIn, they're just going to say it's going to solve all your problems and it's worth the investment because, X, Y, and Z. And that's not true.
Which if a company is leading with that, I would say caution, 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 because when I think about the exercises that I've done throughout the years, I'll think about or have been a part of or had to present or prepare information presented to the board, whatever that looked like. So I think about one of the automations, and it was an app, right? And it's pushing this app, and I was going to inherit it at some point. And someone's telling me, sitting in the recruiting leader seat, understanding one, what the workflows are in the system, two, what we need to do up front to get those candidates and drive them, three, what productivity levels we need to meet overall. 4, there's no magic box. Just keep saying that over and over. 5, you're in a branch model and you need to talk to people who are in front of you. So now it's going to limit your response time and things like that within this set window or the set duration that happens, whatever the case may be. And I remember looking at the line item that was going to be presented to the board. And it said, this will result in a cost savings of X in Y people because it's going to automate the process. People are just going to come into the app and want to go to work, and clients are going to use it in that way. On the flip side of that, I also knew someone who put it in an app and then within their business try to get clients to use it and kind of force them on the app, candidates force on the app. And they took some hits, man. They took some real hits when it came to people just didn't want to do it and didn't want to use it. Like I said, if you're paying a candidate in there all day, they will go on there. They will make sure they are getting paid. But outside of that, you really can't force someone to download yet another app on their phone that is very specific. So when I saw this line item, I was like, no. And then, by the way, when we were talking about the efficiency piece, I said, I need to know that entire end-to-end process and how it exactly works and what the expectation is, because you're actually adding more onto someone's plate. You're not taking anything away. As soon as you tell a recruiter that you need to respond to this talent within 4 hours or whatever the hour amount is, now you're telling them.
Wasn't it originally like an hour? Wasn't it originally
right?
an hour?
It was like an hour or something like that. So now you're telling someone who has someone standing in front of them that they have to reply to this person. Unless you pull that out of the business as part of the process and have a separate team running it, it's not going to happen. And that cost savings, that efficiency is not going to happen. So I stood on all 10 toes on that one. I still would stand on all 10 toes to this day to say
because it didn't work.
I bet your bottom
right.
dollar,
I mean,
those dollars were never.
They were not found. And then they kept having to throw more money, good money after bad to help just continue to justify it and continue to try to prove that it would work. And it shouldn't be that hard.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It shouldn't, if you have a good concept and it's working, but you shouldn't be trying to sell something and say this is going to replace all of this if you don't really understand it. And, I would warn any executive who's being told something like that to check facts, check the notes, check the trust but verify, because that is a lot to stand on and say that you understand implicitly how this is going to work. And, and I think that there's been times where I've stood my ground and I've said, no, you can't do it that way. No, that's not going to work. And it's probably not helped me.
Yeah.
I don't know that it necessarily hurt me in that moment, but maybe over time it did, because to me, if I'm going to stand in front of a product and say, you need to invest in this, this is important, we need to figure this out, that's my word. Mm-hmm. I expect that people are going to hold me accountable for that. Yeah. And if you're just doing it because somebody convinced you that it is what you should do, then I'm not invested in it. I don't believe in it. So, and it's really interesting because I've told a lot of people, when you're trying to sell into a big company, you may be able to get to the CEO, you may be able to get to an executive, but they don't understand enough why it might be important or why it's not important. Mm-hmm. And so you have to really get to those middle managers and those people, because they're the ones who are going to be impacted by it. They're the ones whose budgets are going to feel it. And they really got to help sell it to the higher ups, because otherwise it's going to happen.
Yeah, we were talking about strategic framework today. So I'm building out strategic framework to say, when we have a client, let's put them on this journey, right? Where are they at when you look at recruiter process, and you look at technology, and you look at initiatives that they have, all within the talent acquisition umbrella. And the conversation that we had was, depending on what part of the journey you're talking about, if you're doing, let's call it journey mapping, let's call it strategic framework, to get the business into this better place, it depends on the level when you're thinking about it. Because to just your point of what you said, if you're thinking about the executive level seat, let's say the CEO just has an initiative and a directive that's probably coming from the board, right? So they have made these commitments and things like that. Now you go next level down. So let's say that's a president level that runs that specific business or whatever else. Or it could be a COO if it's in a, different kind of company or whatever else. So when you go down to that level, same thing. They have initiatives, they have the goals they need to meet. They know they need to increase productivity, they need to enhance, and at some point they need to find labor arbitrage. Let's say that. And they need to get to be able to be a business that is cutting edge and sustainable and all of those kind of fun things. Not even disruptive. I'm going to say they're not disruptive at this point. They're just trying to get to sustainable innovation and keep up with the Joneses in the market. We talked about earlier. And then you have that next layer down who, depending on that person, right, may or may not really understand the crux of the business. I would venture to guess there's a high percentage that don't. There are some that understand from the seat all the way up to that level and how everything needs to click together and work. So when you're thinking about your strategic framework, who you're talking to is, to your point, is so important because one, the middle managers are typically where all the information lies in being able to do that, but they don't have any buying power or buying decision. You pull it up a level, let's say it's, that's your director or VP level. They may or may not, based on the organization, have buying power. And then you pull it yet up another level. That's usually where there is some buying power, within there, if there's going to be buying power, if there's not at that next level down within it. So really understanding your audience, two, what is important to them and bringing the right people into the fold to say, we do need that because of these things. And then you understand the framework at the top level is so important. Otherwise, you're not going to sell it. And leading with, to your point, in an organization and saying, we're going to be as efficient as 10 people. Don't ever say that going in the door. You don't know, one, what their systems are today. Two, you have to find the optimization and efficiency before you can even consider labor arbitrage. Find it. Make sure it works. Put it in. Find how you can make the desk more efficient. And then talk about what you can carve out from if you do need to find some labor arbitrage or whatever, or you need to shift onshore, nearshore, whatever that looks like. This is probably the unspoken part of the business overall that I'm speaking right now. But if you lead with arbitrage, it's really hard. And I've been given dollars to say, Jennifer, I need you to find, whatever, $1 million, $2 million, whatever that might look like, to cut out of our staff because of the state and condition of our business. We're not selling enough, whatever the case may be. And then but I always look for the efficiencies first and then say, based on your efficiencies and what we can gain, if we want to keep everything net neutral, this is the impact to people that it looks like. Or ideally your business grows, you find efficiencies, those people are still working, their desk is more efficient, or maybe they can handle a little bit more and you're in a different position. So I think leading with, we're going to sell you this to cut these people out is bonkers, Danielle. I'm going to say it. It's bonkers.
It is. It is. But I think that's a lot of it. I think it's companies trying to sell products and using that as a way to get to executives because they're being forced to do that. Because I know I've had plenty of conversations with different technology companies over the years. And I'm like, yeah, I just don't feel like it's the right choice for us right now. We don't really have that particular need, whatever the case may be. And they'll try to go around, they would try to go around or they, run into an executive at an event or whatever. And yeah, sure, maybe they got 20 minutes with them and that sort of thing. But a lot of times it would be, so who makes the final decision on this? Who,
the person hiding behind the curtain.
It means like, I don't want to talk to you. It means I don't want to talk to you anymore because you're not buying what I'm selling. And you need people like that. You need people who are going to guard the gate, so to speak.
Yes.
And no, we don't need it. Who understand the process, who understand what's going on and where where we've been and where we're going to understand what is necessary to keep going in one direction or to pivot to another direction or whatever. Otherwise, you're sunk.
Yes.
Because people will tell you anything, it's unfortunate, but it's true. And then once you kind of start using things and people get used to it, then it's harder to break them of those and pull them away later, that kind of thing. As we know, because how many times we're like, oh, we'll do a free trial or, low cost pilot. Well, I don't want to get people hooked on something that they may not be able to keep, or they're not going to adopt it because they know they're not going to keep it very long. So they're just never going to incorporate it. So then it's going to fail anyway.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, I think, having the highly guarded, you were great at highly guarding me. I appreciated it so much because there's so many people that come in and say, we want you to buy this, right? You can't look at everything. So it's important to have that vetting process to say, this makes good business sense. This doesn't make business sense. We'll put this on the calendar. We won't put that on the calendar. How do you operate otherwise? Otherwise, you're looking at different products all day. And what I'll say is that's the one thing that I appreciate about where I am today is it's never a lead with, yes, recruitment, marketing, waste and spend 1,000. We will absolutely reduce that. But when you think about the technology aspects, like the agentic AI, the chat bot, all of those things. It's to either enhance the candidate experience, enhance the recruiter experience, and nurture the database, enhance that, because it's, okay, you have a lot of talent in there that one, you've already paid for in dollars, and how do you reuse people who have already applied to your jobs? And then on the back end, when you think about, like the staffing world redeployment rates, how do you, kind of redeploy those people? So anyways, I appreciate those conversations to say, how do we make your desk more efficient versus how do we save your company based on labor arbitrage, 1,000 people or whatever that looks like, because that may or may not, to your point, be the case based on that business. So.
And yeah, losing people should never be the goal. It may be a byproduct of something, but I don't think it should be the goal. It should be about efficiency, and we know with recruitment marketing, there has been a lot of waste, a lot of money spent that you couldn't track, a lot of stuff that has happened over the years that if we can make that more efficient, if we can tighten that up for people, I think that's huge. And that's going to help them to have people get paychecks and things like that and be more efficient in their roles.
Agree 1,000%. All right. You want to stop there?
Yeah. I think we've hashed it out pretty well.
All right. This episode has been sponsored by socialjobs.com. Danielle, over to you.
Yeah, you can find us on all the streaming services, Spotify, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, iHeartMusic, et cetera, et cetera. And you can also click the link in our show notes to buy us coffee.
That's right. Like, share, follow, subscribe, comment. And until next time, bye.